Just because I made my adoptive brother unhappy, my sister and my wife sent me into the deep woods of the Appalachians to be taught a lesson. Before leaving, my wife even handed the locals a stack of cash, whispering for them to give me a rough time. After that, I became nothing more than a toy for the villagers to beat for amusement, the lowest form of trash for their release. If I showed even a hint of resistance, the lashes grew harder and the violations became more brutal. It only took 3 months for me to go from desperate struggling to numbly stripping myself bare whenever they approached. Then one day, the village had burst into my shack. I instinctively started peeling off my only tattered jacket, but she screamed at me, "Put your clothes on. Mrs. Sterling is here to take you home." I wrapped the rags around myself in a daze, wondering silently, do I even have a home left? Before I could even process the news, a sharp pain shot up from the bridge of my foot. The village head stepped on me, her spit flying into my face as she hissed a warning. "You know what to say and what to keep shut, you little rat. If you talk, we won't mind letting the whole world know what happened to you here." By then, a high society golden boy, like you won't have a shred of reputation left. I lowered my eyes numbly. She actually thought Sienna would care? If Sienna truly cared about me, she wouldn't have dumped me in this hellhole for over a year. She had left me here to rot without a single word. I shrunk back, pulling my torn clothes tighter as I caught the flicker of greed in the village head's eyes. Over the past year, I had seen the true, ugly faces of these people. As long as I could leave, I promised myself to stay far away from Sienna and Basil. I would never show my face to them again as long as I lived. I followed the village head out of the low mud hut, the sunlight blinding me so much it felt like a physical weight. Sienna was standing by her black SUV, her gaze freezing on my tattered rags while her brow furrowed in disgust. "What is this supposed to mean, Silas? Are you dressing like a hobo to remind me how miserable you were?" Originally, she felt a tiny spark of guilt for leaving me in the mountains, but Basil had warned her that I might play the victim to gain sympathy. Looking at me now, she was convinced he was right. I wasn't even wearing shoes. Her guilt instantly curdled into loathing. She thought I was pathetic for using such a low tactic to guilt-trip her. The long-term abuse had turned my trauma into a reflex. I immediately dropped my head and began slapping my own face. "I'm sorry, I was wrong. I shouldn't have done this." I slapped myself again and again, showing no mercy to my own skin. Sienna was startled by the sudden violence, reaching out instinctively to stop me. She froze when she saw my cheeks swelling instantly, a thin trail of blood leaking from the corner of my mouth. The village head panicked too, grabbing my hand and pretending to be concerned. "Mr. Silas, what on earth are you doing? Why are you hurting yourself?" Secretly, she gave me a murderous glare that made my entire body tremble. "Fine, just get in the car." "Stop acting," Sienna said, waving her hand dismissively as if looking at me made her feel dirty. I stumbled into the car. The cabin smelled faintly of expensive perfume, a sharp contrast to the sour stench clinging to my body. Sienna didn't look at me once during the drive. She just coldly ordered the driver to start the engine. As the car bumped along the mountain road, Sienna spoke with a tone of ultimate charity. "I wasn't going to forgive you so soon, but Basil has a kind soul. You're only going back because he begged for you. If you're ever disrespectful to him again, don't blame me for being heartless." My throat felt tight. I wanted to explain, but I felt too exhausted to even try. This marriage had been a mistake from the very beginning. Sienna had been drugged at a party and ended up in bed with me. I knew she and Basil were in love, so I never intended to marry her. But the elders of the Sterling family looked down on Basil because he grew up in an orphanage. They used the incident to force the marriage, and Sienna was effectively sold to me. I had loved her since we were teenagers, so I naively thought it was a dream come true. Instead, it was the start of a nightmare. Because of one unhappy word from Basil, she and my sister dumped me in these isolated woods for over a year of living death. I lowered my eyes to hide the bitterness, nodding faintly. "Mrs. Sterling, I won't speak out of turn to Basil anymore. I won't make either of you angry. If it's possible, can we get a divorce once we're back?" Sienna glanced at me with sharp annoyance. "That's enough. What's with the sarcasm? As if you'd ever actually leave the Sterling fortune. Are you trying to make Basil look like the bad guy again? You're truly disgusting." "No, I'm not. I mean it. I really mean it." I scrambled to explain. Suddenly, a sharp, twisting pain flared in my lower abdomen. I clutched my stomach, shaking uncontrollably. Sienna saw me and scoffed. "Doing this once or twice is fine. Any more and it just gets irritating." My face turned deathly pale. I gritted my teeth and whispered, Can we pull over? What now? Please, just stop the car for a second." Sienna ignored me and closed her eyes. acting as if I didn't exist.
这个制
I
度叫
couldn't
做
hold
价
it
值积
anymore.
分啊，就
A
是说我
warm,
们可以用这个
humiliating
积
liquid
分
ran
在这
down
里
my
买到
thighs, and
一
a
些
foul
物
odor
品。
began to fill the luxury cabin. I
我
covered
们
my
获得
face
积分
with
的
my
方式就
hands.
是
Waves of
做一些
despair
小
and
镇的
shame
任务，
crashing over
还
me.
有
During that year of
这个每
inhuman
一
torture,
个
I had lost
节
all
日，
dignity as a normal human being. Sienna caught the
还
scent
有
and
节
her
日
high
里的
heels
这
slammed
个
into
小游
my
戏获
side.
胜，都
Silas,
会给我们
you're
这个价值
filthy.
积分。
You couldn't even hold it like a civilized person?
我们
The
现在
pure
是应
hatred
该
in
有
her
了
eyes was no
140
different
点，
from the
我们
villagers,
任务好
but
像
it hurt
还没
1,000 times more
还没
coming from
做，
her. I curled myself into a tight ball, repeating in a low whisper, I'm sorry, I'm
因为话题
sorry.
给了我们40，
Sienna
还有
wanted
我
to
们
keep
这
shouting,
个
but the driver spoke up hesitantly. Ma'am,
小
let's
游戏
just
获
get
得冠
home.
军给了100，
Something
应
is
该是
wrong with
140。
Mr. Silas. It
如果
was
我
then
没
that
记错的
Sienna noticed the spot where she had kicked me. Blood was beginning to seep through
话，
my
在这里
thin
就可以购
pants.
物了。
She froze, falling into an eerie silence for the rest of the trip. We drove in silence all the way back to the villa. Basil was sitting on the living room sofa playing video games. When he saw me, he immediately dropped the controller. He hid behind Sienna, looking up at her with fearful eyes. Sienna, Silas is back. He's not going to be mad at me, is he? I didn't mean to stay here while he was gone. Please don't let him yell at me. His eyes turned red, making it look like he was the one who had suffered a great injustice. Sienna hugged him tightly, her voice softening with comfort. It's okay, Basil. Don't be afraid of him. He doesn't have the guts to touch you now. She turned to me, her eyes snapping back into cold daggers. Silas, you better stay in your place. You don't run this house. If you dare bully Basil again, I will make you regret ever coming back. I let out a hollow laugh. I had never actually done anything to him. Since we were kids, Basil loved telling everyone I hurt him, acting fragile to get what he wanted. I was used to it, but this time, I didn't even have the energy to argue. I ignored the pain and knelt down in front of them, my voice low and submissive. I'm sorry. Everything was my fault before. I shouldn't have wanted things that didn't belong to me. Stop pretending to be pathetic. Sienna kicked me right in the chest. I fell hard against the floor, my vision going black for a moment. Don't think you can gain sympathy this way. I will never forgive what you did. Sienna, he's so scary. I'm frightened. Basil whimpered, clutching Sienna as if I were a monster. I lay on the floor, helpless as they rained insults down on me. I was numb. A year of torture had ground my pride into dust. I even started to wonder if this was all just some cosmic punishment I deserved. Drag him to the basement, Sienna said, waving her hand like she was shooing away a fly. 2 bodyguards grabbed my arms and hauled me down into the cold, damp basement. They threw me onto the concrete floor, and I felt like every bone in my body had shattered. I curled into a corner, my consciousness drifting away. In my mind, I was back in that mountain village, seeing the twisted faces of the men and women. The memories of their rough hands and cruel games replayed in my head like a horror movie. I groaned in pain, but there was no one there to hear me. I don't know how much time passed before a blinding sting woke me up. I opened my eyes to see Basil standing over me, holding a leather belt stained with old blood. Silas, you used to be so high and mighty. How did you turn into such a pathetic dog? A twisted grin stretched across his face, his eyes full of pure malice. My survival instincts kicked in, and I curled up tighter. Why? I thought, I always treated you well growing up. Basil didn't stop. The belt lashed down again and again. The force was so violent that my vision began to flicker into darkness. Your very existence is a mistake. You were just born into the right family, and you got everything I wanted. His eyes were filled with a distorted, serpentine hatred. Ever since Basil was adopted, the entire White family had treated him like a prince. They gave him the best food, the best clothes, and everything he asked for, as if they wanted to strip my life bare to feed him. I was the one who was cast aside, ignored, and sacrificed. And yet, it still wasn't enough for him. The belt tore through my skin. The agony was so intense I nearly fainted, my mind beginning to wander. Through the haze, I thought I saw my sister, Beatrice, standing at the door. She looked shocked, but her voice remained chillingly calm. Basil, what are you doing? I just came to see him. This wasn't me. Beatrice glanced at me with contempt, looking at me like a pile of trash. It's fine. Someone like him needs a good beating to learn his lesson anyway. There wasn't a hint of concern in her voice. It was as if I weren't her brother at all. I lay on the icy floor, no longer having the strength to speak. I was just cold, a cold that seeped deep into my marrow. When I woke up again, I was in a hospital bed. Beatrice was standing by my side, looking down at me with zero warmth in her eyes. I know Basil was the one who hit you. Keep your mouth shut about it. You owe him so much anyway, so you probably deserved it. I stared at the ceiling, my voice sounding hollow. What exactly do I owe him? My sister frowned, her voice dripping with impatience. You bullied him since you were kids. You even stole Sienna from him. Isn't that enough? I was so tired of those 2 lies. Since we were small, whenever Basil cried, I was the villain. If he tripped, I pushed him. If his toy broke, I ruined it. If he failed a test, it was my fault. As for Sienna, I was a victim of that drugging too. I closed my eyes, refusing to argue. In their eyes, any explanation from me was just a manipulative lie. I was done, truly deeply done. Right after Beatrice left, a doctor walked in with my chart, his expression grim. Where is your family? I need to discuss some things. I don't have a family. It's just me. You can tell me directly. The doctor hesitated but finally spoke. Your internal organs have suffered severe trauma and displacement, especially your kidneys. They are failing. I wanted to smile, but I couldn't move the muscles in my face. I had forgotten that during the repeated fevers in those dark mountains, my face had become partially paralyzed. So what happens next? With perfect care, you might have 6 months. If things continue like this, you have maybe 2 weeks left. I felt a sudden sense of peace. I was finally going to die. I had expected it. My body had felt like a hollow shell for a long time. 6 months or 2 weeks didn't really make a difference to me. Staying alive was just being a ghost in a shell. Death was a release. I nodded. I understand. Thank you, doctor. The doctor wanted to say more, but Sienna burst in, looking furious. What kind of stunt are you pulling now? You couldn't stay in the basement? You upset Basil so much he ran away from home. How can you just lie here like you've done nothing wrong? I didn't say anything. I just watched her. She grabbed the collar of my hospital gown, trying to rip me out of the bed. The 4 needle was torn out of my arm, and blood sprayed across the white sheets. I let out a muffled groan as a metallic taste flooded my throat. I clamped my jaw shut, forcing the blood to stay down. The doctor rushed over to stop her. Mrs. Sterling, the patient needs rest. If any of you help this piece of trash, I'll see to it that you're all fired. Sienna screamed. This was a Sterling-funded hospital. The staff looked at each other, terrified to move. Sienna's bodyguards dragged me across the floor and threw me into the main hall of the Sterling mansion. My cheeks scraped against the hardwood, burning with pain. My body wouldn't obey me anymore. I just lay there like a dead dog. Basil was curled up on the sofa, being pampered by my parents and Beatrice. He kept glancing at me, his eyes full of triumph and mockery. Silas, why are you doing this? Are you trying to frame me again? Basil faked a look of terror, his voice trembling perfectly. Sienna kicked me in the stomach. The pain turned the world black for a second. Apologize to Basil right now, or we are getting a divorce. I struggled to lift my head, looking at my family sitting high up on the sofa. There wasn't a flicker of worry on their faces, only coldness and disgust. Beatrice seemed slightly bothered, but she only muttered, "Stand up. You look pathetic." I knew I looked like a monster, not a man, but I literally didn't have the strength to crawl. Basil immediately panicked and knelt on the floor in front of me, crying, "Silas, please don't do this. I know you want to look like the victim, but I never meant to hurt you." Sienna looked at Basil with pity and kicked me again. "Get up. I'm the one who told Basil he could live here. You have no right to kick him out." My parents' attention was entirely on Basil. My mother sighed. "Silas, why are you so bitter? You just got back and you're already picking on him. Maybe it was better if you stayed in those mountains." They couldn't see the blood soaking into my clothes. They couldn't see the gray tint of my skin. I tried to speak, but the moment I opened my mouth, a huge spray of blood erupted. Sienna paused for a second, then scoffed. "Nice acting." In the next heartbeat, blood began to pour from my mouth in an unstoppable stream, staining the floor deep red. The blood didn't spray in a dramatic, theatrical arc. It came out in thick, dark clots, spilling over Silas's lower lip and running down his chin, instantly, ruining the imported Persian rug beneath his face. For a second, the living room remained entirely still. The only sound was the low, rhythmic hum of the central heating and the frantic, repetitive clicking of Basil's video game controller. "Silas, that is disgusting," Beatrice said, her voice rising in irritation as she pulled her legs up onto the sofa. "Get up. If you're going to vomit, do it. In the bathroom. You're doing this on purpose to ruin the carpet." Sienna took a step back, her leather heels clicking against the exposed hardwood. At the edge of the rug, her initial reaction was anger, the same immediate, defensive fury she had felt every time Silas staged a crisis to distract from Basil's tears. "Get up, Silas," she commanded, her voice sharp. "Stop this, right now." But Silas didn't move. His head remained flat against the floor, his cheek resting in a growing pool of dark, copper-scented liquid. His eyes were half open, glassy and unfocused, staring at a point beneath the sofa where a stray dust bunny clung to the wood. His chest rose in a shallow, rattling wheeze, then sank, staying flat for 3 agonizing seconds before another wet gasp tore through his throat, bringing more blood with it. "Sienna." Basil's voice lost its high, whiny pitch. He stood up from the sofa, the controller slipping from his fingers and clattering against the coffee table. "Sienna, he's not moving. He's acting. Sienna muttered, though her hand had begun to tremble against her skirt. He did this at the hospital too. The doctor said he was fine. The doctor didn't say he was fine, Beatrice said, her voice suddenly dropping into a cold, hollow register. She had noticed the color of Silas's skin. It wasn't the pale shade of a man who was angry or holding his breath. It was the flat, yellowish gray of wet clay. Sienna, look at his fingers. Silas's fingertips, pressed against the white wool of the rug, had turned a deep, bruised purple. My mother stood up from the sofa, her face pale. Silas? Silas, stop playing. Your father is coming home in an hour. If he sees this. She reached out with her foot, gently nudging Silas's shoulder with the toe of her slipper. The moment her slipper touched his shoulder, Silas's body reacted. It wasn't a conscious movement. It was the deep primal reflex of a dog that had been kicked too many times. He didn't rise. Instead, his limbs curled inward, his knees pulling toward his chest, and his hands came up to cover his head in a tight, protective ball. A low, dry whimper, a sound that didn't belong to a 24-year-old man, escaped his lips, wet with blood. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice bubbling through the fluid in his throat. I'm sorry, don't kick. I'll clean it. I'll clean it. Sienna's heart took a sudden, violent plunge. The sheer, instinctual terror in his movement was something no actor could fake. It was the movement of someone who spent their nights in the dark, waiting for the next blow. She looked down at her own shoe, the heavy, pointed heel she had used to kick him in the car, the same heel that had left a dark, wet stain on the fabric of his trousers. Call an ambulance, Sienna whispered, her voice cracking. We can't call an ambulance to the house. Beatrice hissed, her professional instincts instantly kicking in. If the neighbors see paramedics, the press will have it by morning. The Sterling stopped. I don't care about the stock, Sienna roared, a sudden, terrifying panic exploding in her chest. She fell to her knees beside Silas, her expensive skirt soaking in the blood on the rug. Silas? Silas, look at me. It's Sienna. I'm not going to hurt you. Silas. She reached out to touch his face, but the moment her hand brushed his temple, Silas shivered violently, his eyes rolling back until only the whites showed. His jaw went slack, and the shallow, rattling breath stopped altogether. The private wing of the Sterling Memorial Hospital was locked down by 6 p.m. The Sterling family didn't use the public emergency room. Silas had been brought in through the underground ambulance bay, his body covered by a thick wool blanket to hide the blood from any stray cameras. Sienna stood in the hallway, her hands covered in dried, flaking dark spots. She had refused to wash them. Every time she looked at her palms, she saw the texture of Silas's skin, dry, cold, and paper-thin, like a leaf that had spent the winter under the snow. Beatrice was on her phone near the window, her voice low and furious as she spoke to the family's public relations firm. Our mother sat on the vinyl bench, her head in her hands, weeping quietly not for Silas, but for the terrible mess the family was suddenly facing. The double doors of the intensive care unit swung open, and Dr. Harrison walked out. He wasn't the young resident who had been intimidated by Sienna's threats. Earlier that afternoon, Dr. Harrison was the chief of medicine, a man whose tenure at the hospital predated the Sterling family's financial stake in the building. He didn't look at Sienna with the usual deference. He looked at her with a quiet, clinical disgust. Where is his primary guardian? Dr. Harrison asked, his voice flat. I'm his wife, Sienna said, stepping forward. How is he? Is he? When can we take him home? Dr. Harrison let out a short, cold breath that was almost a laugh. Take him home? Mrs. Sterling, your husband is currently on a ventilator. His blood pressure is being maintained by 3 different vasopressors, and we have just initiated emergency dialysis. Dialysis? Beatrice paused her phone call, frowning. He's young. Why does he need dialysis? Because his kidneys have been pulverized, Dr. Harrison said, turning his gaze to Beatrice. And I use that word in its literal, physical sense. He has suffered multiple, repeated blunt force impacts to his lower back and flanks over a period of several months. The scar tissue in his retroperitoneal space is so dense that his renal arteries are practically occluded. Sienna's breath caught in her throat. The mountains. He was in the Appalachians, Sienna stammered, her voice small. The locals, we paid them to teach him a lesson. We didn't think. You paid them to kill him, Dr. Harrison corrected her, his voice dropping into a chilling whisper. Because that is what they did. He has 92 distinct lacerations on his back and thighs, some of them so old they've healed into thick keloids, others so fresh they were still leaking serum when we cut his shirt off. He has 3 broken ribs that healed improperly, a displaced clavicle, and his stomach is so shrunken from chronic starvation that he cannot. digest solid food. But Basil,
会偷我没法
Mother
抓
sobbed
你
from the bench. Basil said Silas was the one who was violent. Silas was always so difficult. Basil is a
那
liar,
我们这个
a
泡
cold
温
voice
泉的
said
环
from the
节
end of
就
the
按照
hall.
惯例给
They
大
all
家
turned.
跳一下。
Silas's father, Arthur Sterling, was walking toward them. He had just arrived. From the corporate office, his face pale and drawn. In his hand, he held
那我
a
们
thick
今天
manila
就回这么
envelope.
多吧，就不回
Arthur,
满了，回
Mother
300
said,
够了。
reaching out to him. Thank God you're here. Tell them
再
we
回的
didn't
话，可
know.
能今天下
Arthur didn't
矿
touch
要
her.
这个
He threw the
时间要
envelope
不
onto
够
the
了。
small table beside her bench. It
争取
spilled
12点
open,
之前
revealing
这个
dozens
回
of
家。
photographs, bank statements, and a copy of a police report from the State Police Division in West Virginia. I sent my security team to that village 3 hours ago,
我们还得
Arthur said,
再
his
回家一趟。
voice shaking with a rage so deep it sounded
大家
like
把
gravel
身上的
shifting
东西整理一
underwater.
下。
The moment Silas
太多了。
collapsed, I knew something was wrong. Do you know what they found?
还好我们这个传
Sienna
送点
looked
开
at
得
the
早。
photographs. They were pictures of a dark, windowless mud hut with a dirt floor.
好像这个
On the
女神
wall
祝
hung a
福今天
rusted
又忘
iron
用了，
chain
因为
and a
是这
wooden
个版本
paddle,
刚更新的，
stained
我也
with
不太
dark,
习惯。
greasy spots. The village head
我忘了。
didn't even fight when my men
今天
showed up,
今天的
Arthur
祝福
said,
井干了，
pointing a finger at
人无
Sienna.
完人说。
She showed them the contract,
今天就没有
the
祝福
one you signed, Sienna. The one where you transferred $50,000 to a local
这个得留着。
agricultural cooperative account with a written addendum asking them to break his pride so he would learn to respect his family. Sienna felt the floor beneath her tilt. No, I just wanted him to stop being so
还是6 点
arrogant.
了，我尽量
Basil
保证
said
6点
Silas
之前
had
呢。
pushed him down the stairs. Basil said. Basil pushed himself. Arthur said, his voice flat. I went through the security footage from the villa from 18 months ago.
那今天
The
就
day
先不
Basil
过矿
claimed
了，直接
Silas
直接
threw
开
him
始
down
了
the。steps. I
必
had
须
the
要挖
raw
到40
files
层
pulled
呢。
from the hard drive in the basement. Basil
体力是
waited
肯定
until
够，因为
Silas
有
turned
东西
his
吃。
back. Then he threw himself down the 5 carpeted steps and started screaming. He looked at his wife, then at Beatrice, and finally at Sienna. You 3 let a sociopath run this house, Arthur said. And you sent my son to be tortured for a year because of it. He's your adoptive son. Mother cried out defensively. Basil is. Silas is the only son I have, Arthur said, his voice breaking as he looked toward the glass doors of the ICU. And according to the doctors, I have him for exactly 12 more days. The intensive care unit was silent, save for the rhythmic, pneumatic hiss of the ventilator and the high, thin beep of the cardiac monitor. Silas looked incredibly small in the center of the large hospital bed. The swelling in his cheeks had gone down slightly, but it had been replaced by a flat, sunken hollow under his cheekbones. His eyes were closed, his lashes dark. Against his gray skin, Sienna sat in the chair beside the bed. She had been there for 48 hours, refusing to leave even when the nurses came in to change the dialysis bags or adjust the 4 lines. She had tried to hold his hand, but his skin was so bruised from the repeated 4 insertions that even her gentlest touch left a dark, blue mark. Silas, she whispered into the quiet room. Silas, please. There was no answer. The machine hissed, chest rising, chest falling. The door behind her opened, and Beatrice walked in. Her usual sleek, professional appearance was gone. She was wearing a simple sweater and jeans, her hair pulled back in a messy knot. The lawyers are downstairs, Beatrice said, her voice hollow. Sienna, state prosecutor, is looking at the contract. They're talking about conspiracy to commit grievous bodily harm, maybe manslaughter if. She couldn't finish the sentence. Let them, Sienna said. Beatrice looked at her sister-in-law in surprise. What? Let them arrest me, Sienna said, her eyes never leaving Silas's face. Let them put me in a cell. Do you think a cell is worse than this? Do you think any prison they put me in will be worse than knowing I did this to him? Sienna. I loved him, Beatrice, Sienna whispered, a tear finally spilling over her eyelid and running down her cheek. When we were 18, before Basil came back from that school in Europe, Silas used to wait for me outside my chemistry class. He'd have a thermos of hot cocoa because he knew the lecture hall was always freezing. He never said anything loud. He was just there. She reached out, her fingers hovering a millimeter above Silas's pale hand too, afraid to make contact. And I let Basil tell me he was a monster, she sobbed. I let Basil convince me that Silas's quietness was arrogance. I married him because the family forced it, but I was glad. I was so glad to have him. And then I spent 3 years treating him like trash because I was too proud to admit I wanted him to love me. The cardiac monitor suddenly changed its rhythm, the beeps coming faster, more erratic. Silas's eyelids fluttered. Sienna stood up, her hand instantly going to the call button. Doctor, he's waking up. It took several minutes for the medical team to stabilize him. They adjusted the ventilator, reducing the sedation, until Silas's eyes slowly opened. They weren't the bright, clear blue they had been when he was a teenager. They were dull, cloudy, and filled with a deep, ancient exhaustion. He looked around. The white room, his gaze passing over the expensive equipment, the private bathroom, and finally settling on Sienna. His reaction was immediate and terrible. His heart rate spiked to 150. He began to thrash against the soft cloth restraints the nurses had tied around his wrists to keep him from pulling out the ventilator tube. His mouth moved around the plastic pipe, a muffled, desperate sound escaping his chest. Silas, calm down, the nurse said, trying to hold his shoulders. You're safe. You're in the hospital. But Silas wasn't looking at the nurse. He was looking at Sienna's hand, which was resting on the bed rail. He was looking at her ring, the large diamond band. That marked him as her property. Get her out, the resident muttered, seeing the patient's oxygen levels drop rapidly on the monitor. Mrs. Sterling, you have to leave. His pressure is too high. Silas, Sienna cried, her hands reaching out in desperation. Silas, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But Silas only struggled harder, his entire body shaking as he tried to pull his arms free to cover his face. He didn't look angry, he looked terrified. He looked at his wife the same way he had looked at the village head in the mud hut, as a source of pain that could not be resisted, only endured. Out, the doctor roared, pushing Sienna toward the door. Now, the Sterling mansion was quiet when Sienna returned to retrieve her things. The police had already been there. Basil's room on the second floor had been taped off, but Basil himself was sitting on the stairs, his knees pulled up to his chest, looking like a frightened child. When he saw Sienna, he stood up, his eyes wide. Sienna, he said, reaching out to her. You have to tell them. The police. They came to my school. They said I beat Silas with a belt. But I didn't. It was a game. We were just playing. You know how Silas is, he always overreacts. Sienna didn't speak. She walked up the stairs, her face empty of any emotion. When she reached the step where Basil stood, she stopped. She looked at his face, the soft, boyish features that had spent 10 years manipulating everyone around him. Sienna, Basil whispered, his voice trembling. Why are you looking at me like that? Slap. The sound was like a pistol shot in the empty foyer. Basil stumbled back against the railing, his hand instantly going to his cheek, which was already turning a bright, angry red. You hit me? You never hit me. I'm not going to hit you again, Basil, Sienna said, her voice so quiet it was almost a whisper. Because the state of New York is going to do it for me. What? The belt you used, Sienna said, taking a step closer until Basil was forced to lean back over the banister. The one with the old blood on it. The forensic team matched the DNA to Silas. They also found your fingerprints on the leather. You're 19, Basil. You're not a minor anymore. No, Dad won't let them. Basil screamed, looking toward the study door, where Arthur Sterling was packing his own files. Dad, tell her she can't do this. The study door opened, and Arthur walked out. He didn't look at Basil. He looked at Sienna. The divorce papers have been prepared, Arthur said. Silas's lawyer, the one I hired for him, has already had them signed by a notary. Silas signed them with his thumbprint because his hand was shaking too much to hold the pen. He handed a single sheet of paper to Sienna. It was a standard dissolution of marriage. There was no request for alimony, no division of assets, no claim on the Sterling fortune. Silas had left everything. He had walked away from the marriage with nothing but his name. He signed it? Sienna asked, her fingers clutching the paper. He wanted it done before his next dialysis session, Arthur said, his voice flat. He told the lawyer he didn't want to die with your name on his medical chart. Basil fell to his knees on the stairs, sobbing hysterically. Dad, please. I don't want to go to jail. It was Silas. He made me do it. He was always so mean to me. Arthur walked down the steps, passing his adoptive son without a single glance. He stopped beside Sienna, looking at the tattered rags Silas had worn from the mountains, which were still sitting in a plastic bag near the door. The police are waiting outside for him, Sienna, Arthur said. And they're waiting for you too. Sienna looked down at the divorce certificate. Then she looked at Basil, who was groveling on the floor, his face covered in tears and snot. The golden prince of the White and Sterling families was nothing but a hollow, cowardly shell. I know, Sienna said. She reached into her pocket, pulled out her wedding ring, the heavy platinum band, and let it drop onto the floor. It rolled down the stairs, clinking against the wood, before settling in the dark, red stain on the rug that had not yet been fully cleaned. Silas didn't die in 12 days. The human body is remarkably stubborn, especially one that has been trained to survive on cabbage water and dry corn in the freezing cold. His kidneys didn't recover, but with 3 times weekly dialysis and a team of specialists paid for by Arthur Sterling's personal account, his condition stabilized. He was moved to a small private sanitarium in upstate New York, far from the city, the press, and the family. The sanitarium sat on a hill overlooking a quiet lake. The trees were bare, their gray branches silver with frost, but the air was clean and free of the smell of mud and wet wood. He spent his days in a wheelchair by the window. His face remained partially paralyzed, the left side of his mouth slightly slack, but his eyes had lost their frantic, wild look. They were just quiet now. Arthur visited him every Saturday. They didn't talk about the trial, which was currently dominating the regional news. They didn't talk about Sienna, who had pleaded guilty to conspiracy and was currently serving a 5-year sentence in a minimum security facility in Connecticut. They didn't talk about Basil, whose lawyers had failed to keep him out of a youth correctional facility for his third-degree assault charge. Instead, Arthur brought him books on botany, the one thing Silas had liked before. His life had been dismantled. The ferns are coming back in the greenhouse, Arthur said one afternoon, setting a small clay pot on the windowsill. I thought you might want to look at the root structure. Silas looked at the green leaves, his thin, scarred finger reaching out to touch the soft frond. Thank you, Father, he said. His voice was raspy, the result of the ventilator tube, but it was clear. You look stronger today, Silas, Arthur said, his hand resting on the back of his son's wheelchair. I'm not stronger, Silas said, looking out at the gray water of the lake. I'm just not running anymore. The doctors say if we can find a matching donor, if we can get your strength up for the surgery. No, Silas said quietly. Arthur paused. Silas, we have the resources. We can find a kidney. The Sterling. I don't want a Sterling kidney, Father, Silas said. He turned his head, his cloudy blue eyes meeting Arthur's. I don't want any more of your family's flesh in my body. I've spent 24 years paying for Basil's life with my own skin. I think I've paid enough. Arthur closed his eyes, his shoulders sinking under the weight of a guilt that would never leave him. I should have looked at the footage earlier. I should have been a father. You're here now, Silas said, his hand moving to rest on Arthur's sleeve. It was the first time he had initiated physical contact with anyone since his return. That's enough. 3 months later, the spring arrived. The ice on the lake broke up with a low, grinding roar, the white sheets drifting south until they melted into the blue water. The gray branches of the birch trees turned a soft, pale green, and the smell of wet earth filled the air. Silas sat on the wooden deck of the sanitarium, a thick blanket over his knees. He was thinner now, his body almost transparent under the white linen shirt Arthur had bought him. His breathing was slow, but it didn't rattle anymore. The dialysis had been stopped the week before, at his own request. His mother and Beatrice had tried to visit him twice. They had stood at the gate of the facility, crying, holding letters filled with apologies and explanations about how they had been tricked by Basil. Silas had refused to see them. Tell them I'm sleeping, he had told the nurse. And indeed, he spent most of his time sleeping now, as the sun began to dip behind the mountains, casting long, purple shadows. Across the water, Silas opened his eyes. The world was very quiet. There was no sound of leather belts hitting flesh. There was no smell of damp mud or the screaming voices of the villagers. There was only the wind in the birch trees and the soft, steady lap of the water against the dock. He reached down, his fingers touching the small, clay pot of ferns Arthur had left for him on the table. The leaves were warm from the afternoon sun. Silas let out a long, slow breath. It didn't catch in his throat. It didn't taste like iron. It was just air. He closed his eyes, his head leaning back against the soft cushion of the chair, and let the quiet take him.